you guys today, and happy that we have everybody joining us. Good afternoon, or good morning, or good night, wherever in the world you are. We're so happy to be back with everybody for a new installment in our supply chain chat series. And our topic today is an exciting one and very real time and relevant, as we were just saying. Many of our customers and prospects can relate to, and that is the 5 must-have demand planning strategies for holiday success. We know the holiday season is the ultimate stress test for demand planners. Black Friday, Cyber Monday, and the weeks like right now leading up to it. Unpredictable demand spikes, volatile supply chains, and huge pressure to meet customer expectations, all while protecting your margins. So today we're going to talk about the top 5 things that every demand planner must do to be holiday ready. So today you're going to learn the top 5. So building agile forecasts that can really adapt to sudden demand surges, how to optimize your inventory to prevent costly stockouts and overstocks. Number 3, aligning pricing and promotions with accurate demand signals. 4 is strengthening collaboration to meet the peak season variability that tends to happen. And lastly, leveraging AI. Of course, this is the hot button for everybody these days, and predictive analytics to really increase your forecast accuracy. So whether it's Black Friday, Cyber Monday, or the holiday shopping rush, we're going to help you get properly prepared. And today we have joining us Sanjeev Balasubramaniam and Jeremy Martin to help me answer the question, how do we plan for holiday success? Guys, thank you for being with us today, and let's get the introductions out of the way. Sanjeev, why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Really appreciate that. Welcome, everyone. And look, thanks for spending time with us today. I'm Sanjeev Balasubramaniam. I'm the Algo's SVP of Solution Architecture. And look, I talk to clients and practitioners every day about demand planning, managing their inventory. And my background is in retail. So events like Black Friday, Christmas, end of financial year, they run in my blood. Jeremy.
Yeah, hi.
Things like financial year sales, toy sales, things like that. But now this activity has changed the shape of the retail landscape, right? In the past, it was just Christmas, maybe Boxing Day sales, you might remember. But now it's January sales. Black Friday has outpaced everything, and Christmas being a second, with the others being more of a familiarity. Up to 40% of your sales are coming in that month between late November and December. So the stakes are really high. And when I say the stakes are high, what I mean is that missing out on what you plan for in this period of time is going to cause you more than missed budgets. If you get it wrong at this time of year, you can damage your brand, allow competitors to permanently get a foot into the door, and steal your market share that you worked so hard to eke out.
Yeah, certainly the holidays seem to be getting more and more complicated from a planning perspective. You mentioned Black Friday as an example. Here in the US, that really used to be just a one-day event that would spill into the weekend until inventory ran out. Now, retailers started to open up promotions on Thanksgiving, then Thanksgiving week. Now it seems like promotions start early November everywhere. So this is a lot tougher from a demand planning perspective. Due to the extended time to sell, it just gives us more chances to get it wrong. So, whether it be underperformance early that signals we're going to be heavy coming out of Black Friday, overperformance early that signals us maybe stocking out pre-Black Friday and not even giving us much time to react or correct. Or it could just be noise early on in the holiday period, and we have to make a determination whether to stick to plan or not. So there's more competition than ever throughout this time period now. So a lot of variables from what competitors are offering, price matching, et cetera. And that just puts a lot of pressure on all areas of the supply chain team to be both agile and aligned throughout the season.
Yeah, and look, I don't envy your task there. I mean, that brings us to our first topic, and that's agility. Here at Algo, many of our customers have products in complex categories, for finished good demand. And what I mean by that is that once a product, a good is made, it has really specific characteristics. It is limited in production. It is high value. It has a limited lifespan. Like a laptop computer is a great example, right? It's hot when it's released, but it's redundant 9 months later when the new model comes in. It's heavily promoted on and off. If we look at one of our great customers, Microsoft, they've got the Surface laptop, and there are competitors there in the market, right, that are fighting against that. And then they're putting that into retailers, and those retailers are competing against each other. So it's heavily on-off promoted, with these competitive products in this retail milieu where they're all fighting against each other. So, in this scenario, static once a quarter forecasts, won't cut it during your holiday spikes. You need agile forecasting that adapts weekly, sometimes even daily, right? And that means layering point of sale signals, promotions, even external factors like consumer sentiment. So Jeremy, you can tell us a little bit about agility.
Yeah, certainly there's a lot to consider, and we'll get into that, throughout today's session. But first, yeah, what do we mean by building agile forecasts that adapt to sudden demand surges? It's not just about reacting quickly, because being too reactive, especially to a small sample size, can cause you to overcorrect and potentially have a bullwhip effect of inventory. So for us, it's about having logic and mechanisms in place to measure whether data is outside the norm and cause for a correction to plan. So that's what we use to gauge, how we adapt and when we adapt on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. So, and then, understanding causation is very important in our modeling process. That's why we use multiple different forecast versions with levers that you'll hear us call them sandbox measures for users to tinker with and experiment to create various scenarios and assumptions. So that helps us prepare for how we want to respond when we do understand causation. So I would say for me, tip number one of being agile is just being aware of variance to plan, but not abandoning your original strategy and plan. Anyone or any system that creates a plan through, a solid, rigorous process has that plan for a reason. So we want to be agile, but not overcorrective. And I think a topic you may have heard about is demand sensing. It's more of a modern technique using real-time data, advanced analytics to help detect and respond to short-term changes in customer demand. So it's a bit different approach than traditional demand forecasting. That really relies on long-term historical data, whereas demand sensing makes us more agile in the short term. So it also integrates a wide range of internal and external signals, not just sales. So our system then uses machine learning to detect patterns and analyze all these dynamic signals to increase our agility and efficiency. I think we have to think practically as well, though. If your lead time is 6 weeks, you're pretty limited in your demand sensing abilities. For some of our customers in this situation, we counteract that by forecasting not only demand by retailer, but safety stock allocations by territory, maybe even on similar configurations as a reserve. So say a given retailer or configurations that we're performing, we then have a set balance to pull from, or maybe even shift one retailer to another. So I think my key there is no forecast is ever perfect. So having contingency plans like this is very important. So demand sensing, it also accounts for timing of the demand. So if product's at the right place, but maybe the wrong time or late, then we find a better home for the product that combines both the right place and the right time to help us maximize sales.
Yeah, that's great. That's a good point you make about, being in the understanding your supply chain. If you have a 6 week lead time, then demand sensing is going to be difficult, right? But if you can fulfill quickly, then the flip side applies, right? You need to be able to get the numbers right, and you need to be able to get them there quickly. So, how can you layer these signals in your forecast? I mean, you can't manage them via spreadsheets and static formulas. You have to start harnessing more complex algorithms, right? Including machine learning and AI.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, everything we're talking about is obviously key to a successful demand planning cycle, but corralling and compiling all of that manually, it's a pretty tall task. So that's why we integrated those sandbox measures I was mentioning within our demand planner, so users can set KPI targets, pull levers, run scenarios, while letting the system do the bulk of the work. So we want to let the system do the heavy lifting from a calculation and compiling perspective. And then use the human element to focus on strategy, actively managing models and inputs. And then once we're done with that, sanity checking and collaborating with the greater supply chain team. So I would say, me personally, my step number one, make sure you have all the data and it's usable. I think that might seem pretty obvious to some folks, but you'd be surprised with some of the various challenges customers have not only getting, but also cleaning up all the data available to them. We're in an environment now where some retailers are even making suppliers pay for their data, or customers have data scattered across various third parties. So that step can be a real challenge. Once you have that locked down, no easy task. Step two is just actively managing the models, both from a baseline perspective and then with promotional lifts. So for me, seasonal models are a foundation of a forecast and need to be solid before we build upon that foundation. So our system is creating these models and lifts, but before we get too into the weeds, we need to make sure they pass the sanity check. So for example, past few years have been a bit tricky, looking back at such a unique time period during the pandemic with wild selling patterns and just supply chain challenges across the board. So, the good news is now we have multiple years of data since all that craziness, but bad news is we have all sorts of new challenges with tariffs, rising price points, etc. So, got to make sure the foundation is solid. And once we have that foundation, that's where we get into our various forecast versions and sandbox measures to try to help guide the system to handle all these new factors. So no matter what we do, there's always going to be strategy, promotions, maybe even roadblocks in the future that are not set in stone yet or known about yet, as much as we'd like them to be. So we can use these levers to make assumptions on things like, what SKUs might be promoted, what types of discounts, how much of new launch items are coming in, and what cannibalization looks like on the old SKUs, et cetera, to create multiple forecast versions. So once we work through all that, we're going to gather our stakeholders and align on one consensus plan that blends all those various scenarios. And obviously, don't forget about aligning with retailers on execution of this plan, because your plan's only as good as the execution. So.
Right. Thank you, Jeremy. So, how about we shift to what this really looks like in real life for our customers? So, how does this typically translate, Jeremy, in their day-to-day work and in demand planning?
Yeah, well, most customers we work with, they have multiple CRM, ERP systems, NetSuite, MS Dynamics, all that. Maybe they have no systems and they're using Excel solely for their demand planning. A lot of customers have very challenged data. And even if they have all their data, is it actually ready for forecasting? Many of them also have bespoke or archaic custom systems that they've built. And the fear of change holds them back from modernizing. So with them, we just try to start with small steps, fix a certain piece of their system and build upon that. But I think the reality is every customer is going to struggle in some way having their data ready to forecast, whether it be reliance on, the API or EDI timing of feeds, third-party distributors, retailers combining and omitting data, or maybe linking the data with like SKUs, that type of stuff. So that's where Algo comes in, not just as a demand planning system, but as a back-end warehouse where we can corral all that data from various inputs and have it available in a seamless way for the user. So this eliminates countless hours of compiling in internal, external systems and applications for our customers, because we'll find a solution to connect those systems for them. So I would say also some of our customers, they use third parties that don't have the capability to send data electronically. So we'll take on the task of loading those offline files into the system. They don't have to worry about it. So at the end of all this, we just make sure the data is available to our customers seamlessly.
Yeah, and Jeremy, I see that every day when I'm talking to our customers, right? I mean, they're literally, swimming in a pool of data, and it's probably not even a pool; it's like a river. There's a rock there, there's a tree stump there. It looks clear over here, but it's a rip over there. I think that's the thing. The key to really, before you start planning, is to get your data right, and have your data working for you. So look, thanks, Jeremy.
Yeah, exactly. For many people, it's all over the place, the data. So I would say measure twice, cut once. I know that sounds simple, but sometimes there's pressure, whether it be internally, externally, both, to move forward with a plan before the foundation is set. So you have to make sure your data is clean and complete first, because that's just so essential.
Yeah, for sure. And so now we're going to move on to kind of our second call out topic, which is how to optimize inventory to avoid stock out. So let's talk about what this translates to in day-to-day life of planners and really how to best optimize inventory to prevent those costly stockouts and overstocks. Sanjeev?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Look, stockouts obviously we know mean loss of revenue, right? But stockouts also cut into your, but overstocks, which is the other side when you're trying to mitigate those stockouts, they cut into margin. So the answer is not just more safety stock, right? It's smarter stock. We can look at the concept in terms of holding a dynamic safety stock. This model allows you to flex a little bit where the inventory risk is highest, while keeping it lean, where demand is steady. So I think the first thing you can do is look at your system. A lot of companies have the old min-max inventory. I hear this every day when I talk to customers, right? And that simply means the system is looking at your stock. Once it hits a minimum number, it just orders back up to a maximum number. That's a very rudimentary method. It doesn't cover the nuance at location, by item, by, that kind of piece. So moving to a process that dynamically calculates model stock by location, by SKU at the time, and it's forward looking, right? Then you can easily cover, based on either the importance of your SKUs to your brand, the velocity, the propensity to age of those SKUs, or the variability of forecast accuracy. And this really reduces the risk of overstocks while, keeping you in stock of your key lines. I think the fastest wins come from, dividing your portfolio into A, B, C. So, obviously A meaning those products, those lines that are vital to your brand, vital to your presence in the market, and you really can't be out of stock of those. B, important, good margin makers, good velocity, but it's not the prime SKU. And then C, often we hear the long tail, right? So divide your products like that. Then look at XYZ, and that XYZ axis is looking at how hard they are to forecast. Something that's simple to forecast, you need to spend much less time even looking at that. I would move away from spending any time, too much time looking at that at all. Whereas something that's very difficult to forecast, that's where you want to spend your time. So align your strategy, align your data, and just don't jump straight into, I need all these algorithms, I need the latest algorithm upgrades.
Yeah, exactly. You nailed it. And I think the days of being able to forecast manually in Excel are over, right? You mentioned all the reasons, but when you're forecasting that way, you open yourself up to human error. For example, stockouts can create other stockouts when you're doing that, because you may under forecast in the future based off of that historical data. So when you're looking at raw sales in the past, right, are you factoring in, that you experienced stockouts during that time? Are you factoring in demand that maybe shifted to the SKUs that actually were in stock during that time, to avoid over forecasting on those this cycle? Did you have a correct forecast but allocate inventory late, or at the wrong time? Did you have poor execution that could have caused you to have pent up demand that boosted certain weeks, and threw off your seasonality models? And then, as you plan inventory this cycle, you're planning it to land too late this year. So there's endless questions you can ask like this, and you likely can't handle them all manually. So, or at least, not in a realistic time frame, to complete your demand plan.
Yeah, and I know we always love to share, customer examples, real world scenarios that we have, certainly for our webinar attendees, to understand the challenges that we see year over year with our customers. Jeremy, what are your sort of thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, since we touch various, different lines of business and retailers, we've got all sorts of challenges. So I can run through a couple real quick. I would say, for one customer they don't receive any sort of promotional data, which is a bit odd. So they have trouble just creating a baseline forecast since they have all sorts of peaks and valleys and choppiness in their data. They're kind of flying blind. So we have to use our modeling to detect and get rid of all the noise for them just to get to a seasonal model. So, this is an example where we actually have to be less agile because we have to set the system to be less reactive. So for them, we're basically just passing a baseline forecast and then letting them focus their resources on collaboration with the retailers. We have other customers where, one of them, they don't even receive sales data, which is obviously very challenging. That's kind of a staple in demand planning, but they only have access to what's shipped and what's returned, and they're working with perishable goods. So there's the unknown of shrink and scrapped inventory. So we have to let our system derive assumed sales for them at a store SKU level and build our forecast off of that. So that obviously goes back to our conversation about making sure the data is correct and usable ahead of time. And due to this specific, unique nature of their business and very short shelf life, we have to be super reactive for this account. So those are a couple scenarios where, some customers, they may not be able to get to a high level of complexity. So we just kind of meet them where they're at. I have other customers with, lots of data, but, they have either delays or gaps in the data that the retailers give them. So we've got a big customer that, had a huge delay in receiving their data because of the EDI restrictions from the retailer. So we handled, their migration from EDI to API connectivity. That drastically improved their data availability by a few days. So common one we get to is retailers not sending complete data. So whether it be only sending deltas each day or sending inventory feeds that don't have zeros in them. So that's very common. We had to create some logic in our system to help detect and identify, transactions like that where a zero would actually be created, and then we adjust our data accordingly. So even if we don't receive that value, we're creating that in our system. So that's a couple, solutions where we've improved the data availability so that they can forecast and react in more real time now. So most observations are data, I think, related, but I would say one kind of generalized observations that I see across the board is many retailers are planning at an account level or at an item level, but then the granular replenishment is not aligned with that. So the left hand and the right hand aren't really in sync. We're forecasting bottoms up so that our demand plan forecast aligns with our store level replenishment strategy. And then when you have, budget adjustments, open to buy constraints, those two things can be affected and altered, in tandem. So I'm seeing retailers more and more trying to cut costs and gain efficiencies. And so we're seeing like limited store level shipments each week from their DCs. And that's creating more stockouts at their highest volume and most important stores. So it's really critical for forecasts to be done and accurate at a store SKU level. And that's why we're now managing store level replenishment for many of our customers, because our bottoms up store forecast aligns with our top down SKU forecast. We actually have a large vendor and a large national retailer where they're working top down, and they're not realizing stores are out of stock, even though they have inventory at their DCs to replenish. So it's pretty common. And this time of year, we tend to see those high volume stores not carrying enough safety stock to get through the weekend. And that's obviously the most costly outs you can have. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're telling me there, Jeremy, that we don't operate in a perfect world. And, I often sit in meetings and you talk to pretty senior people and they say, look, we've got our weeks cover nicely balanced for this line of SKUs, across our business. There is no issue here. But when you delve in or you look from that bottom up, you can say, yeah, sure, you've got the right amount of stock, maybe as a total for your chain. But if you look at the 200 locations, 400 locations, 1,000 locations that your customers walk into, how are they looking at those shelves, right? How do they actually pan out? And I think that's where you really need to isolate those factors that truly impact your stock, the ability to read how those factors, stop you being able to action your plans. So I think that's really good to talk about, that inventory level. But let's also talk a little bit about, pricing and promotions, right? And so I think that's our next topic to discuss here. And one of the key areas when it comes to, action is working through those pricing and promotion areas. And for here, most of our, for most of us, I think promotions have a huge role in influencing stock. If it's not promotions, it's pricing, right? I mean, that's really how we do it. And, in either case, it's about adjusting the consumer's perception of the value of your product, right? And we can control this through what we call demand shaping, right? That's what you're doing, is shaping the demand by changing the price, changing the promotions. And, you can use promotions as well. It's not just to drive in customers or to sell, but it's also to reduce risk on inventory that might be overstocked or aging. So you can look at it like that as a bit of a tool to assist you there. But promotions are a double-edged sword. If you overshoot demand, you lose margin. If you undershoot, you leave sales on the table. So aligning promotions with demand signals can increase your ROI significantly. And so obviously it's a good step to look at your past history, like promotions, see how you did previously, etc. But you can go a step further and look at elasticity modeling. And that's kind of, looking at a lot of detailed statistics there to see how discounts drive volume. And that's not something you can really easily do with a spreadsheet. But you can with a platform that can run some statistical modeling, machine learning, like, for instance, our price planner here at Algo. And you can start with what items can be substituted that complement each other, that cannibalize each other, and which respond most to pricing changes. And that's really important when you want to look at either, how to move a bunch of stock that hasn't been moving, right? What point does that stock start to move, right? And number two, if you're looking to spend your marketing dollar, if you're a retailer, right, and where do you spend it, or which suppliers are giving you rebates, what rebate's worth more than another? $50 from this vendor or $50 from that vendor. What's actually going to move the mark on your gross margin or on your actual volume of sales? Because customers respond to a $50 discount on this product or that product differently, right? And so that will impact your total margins and volume on a promotion. But again, that's very theoretical. Jeremy, what's the practical side of some of the promotions and some of the ways you tackle how they operate and affect demand on your outcomes?
Yeah. Well, our demand planning systems obviously factoring in promotions and pricing discounts year round. But holiday season generally brings some of the most aggressive discounts during a period that already sees increased volume. So means creating an accurate demand signal off those discounts is extremely important. So that's why we have various input methods to capture all this systematically, whether it be promotional data feeds that come directly in our system, promotional calendars that can be uploaded systematically, or even those sandbox measures that users can tweak themselves. So I think a big overlooked calculation this time of year, as an example, is bundle cannibalization. Folks tend to forecast new holiday SKUs or new bundles, but not aggressively, enough factoring in the cannibalization of the demand shifting away from the older SKUs. And that's really important in preventing overstock on outdated models, especially given, the price point and obsoleteness of, say, electronics. So going back to our conversation on agility, price matching is big this time of year as well. So even if we have a planned promotion, we may see different actuals. So we're constantly monitoring what prices are actualizing versus what we had planned for. Retailers could be given bigger than expected discounts to compete with other retailers or products.
Yeah, excellent. So, I mean, what you're saying there is complexity comes from the environment and the go-to-market strategies of not just your partners, but your competitors and their competitors, right? It's very complex. So we have to simplify to get the wins where we can, right? And work out where we need to concentrate our efforts. And like you said, it may be monitoring pricing at a certain point of time and looking where you can react quickly to move that stock in, based on that. So let's move on to our next topic, which is, strengthening collaboration to meet that peak season variability. And that's really the human side, right? That's kind of the most important side, I think, sometimes, because the mathematics, obviously, that's important. You need to get your forecast right. But I think early on, Jeremy, you mentioned that, it's a lot about that, working between the teams and helping your retailer execute what you're hoping they will execute. As an example, if you're a vendor, right? Or if you're a retailer, hoping that the vendor has the stock that is able to come into your DC or into your stores at the right time. That's all about collaboration. And, for us, I'm looking forward to the holidays because they're a bit of a break, right? But for those of us in retail, it's actually a busier time. It requires faster communication between sales and marketing, supply chain and finance. And those silos will slow you down. So the best practice is to have an integrated, sales and operation planning process, meetings, dashboards you can look at, teams that can see promotions, forecasts, supply constraints together. But the real trick, I think, and this is going to sound silly, but is to tell the same story in different languages. And what I mean there is that there's that age-old battle, internal battle, right, between sales and ops, as an example. right? So salespeople, right? They know the customer, they can influence the customer, they know the brand of their customers, right? They know what will pass muster at the customer, at the retailer, as an example, right? And they have to juggle competing customers. They understand the trade-offs between, where the customers are going to make their bets, and their risk is, left and right, if you like, across multiple customers. And that's their language. They need to understand that, right? Ops people, on the other hand, they've got risk in a different way. They need to, balance the constraint and capacity risks upstream. How much have I actually got? How much can I get? If I get that stock, is it going to move, or is it just going to sit there and it could have gone somewhere else, right? And so their risk is a little bit up and down, upstream and downstream to their customer endpoints. They're looking up and down. So from a demand planning perspective, it means you need to put in place, like, at a total, an item, retailer view, and look at constraint and risk from ops as well, and the opportunity view from sales. And then, so you almost have three visuals there. You have the mathematically accurate view. That's your AI forecast or your best ever forecast, your source of basic truth. You have the sales opportunity level forecast, and you have the ops constraint or, understanding of risk forecast. And you need to bring those together into one collaborative platform to get the best of all those worlds. And Jeremy, I'm sure you've had some real life experience, right, to share with us on that.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, there's obviously a lot of roles within supply chain, and they usually have differing KPIs or priorities. So makes touching base on our demand plan pretty essential to success. So that's why our planner, like I mentioned, has the ability to view and save different forecast versions so that we can kind of bounce forecasts back and forth to all the various stakeholders before pushing through one final consensus forecast. So we save our customers a lot of time by doing the upfront dirty work, corralling and cleaning the data, troubleshooting gaps, creating these forecast versions, comparing to budget, et cetera, so that then our customers can spend their time reviewing and aligning with us and the retailers versus just spending all compiling. So and I think that's really our role, and really our goal is we act as kind of a human bridge between sales, operations, and the retailer. And I think what gives us credibility with the various parties is, we're coming from a neutral, data-driven position, focusing only on what makes sense for the business versus having specific sales and inventory goals that need to be met.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, right? Uh, you know, as humans, as people, we especially more and more, I think we are trained to just believe our truth, right? So it's good if we can have a very a basic truth, a set of facts that we can use as a baseline, and then our truth can then be brought in on top of that, depending on what we're looking at, right? I think that's really important. Thanks, Jeremy. Now, what I'd like to talk a little bit about is leveraging AI and predictive analytics. That's our next topic. How we can increase forecast accuracy leveraging AI and predictive analytics. And I think technology can make the collaboration better. AI is much hyped, right, over time. And it will change our lives. It already has, right? We know this straight away when it comes to social media, connections, how we choose things. Every day, your Netflix profile is different to your wife's Netflix. I know mine is. Sometimes I accidentally look at her profile and go, "What are you watching?" It's rom-coms and whatever. And then she looks at mine and she thinks she wonders if she's married. But that's the kind of thing. It's personalized. It's becoming more and more personalized. And now we're moving into an area where AI is already doing things for us. I'm sure you've all seen in the last probably 6 months or so, when you search for something now in Google, you don't just get, the websites, and I can click in the websites and read those websites. I actually get a nice little AI summary, and, originally probably it was right 10% of the time, right? Now that AI summary is probably right about 80% of the time. When I say right enough for me to read that AI summary, get a good handle on the search I'd had, and walk away and make myself look like I know what I'm talking about, right? That has revolutionized things that basically you get to a point where websites underneath aren't even getting traffic. People aren't clicking on those links because they're just reading that AI piece and go, okay, I understand this. It's got 3 or 4 sources. I know the names of those sources. Okay, I move on. And that's where AI is really starting to change how we choose things as well. So I think, it's definitely safe to say we've moved past that cusp of the next big informational change. In my adult working life, I've gone from online encyclopedias, remember in Carter, I even used real encyclopedias when I was a kid, to Googling, to ChatGPT, now to AI searching, as an example, right? I don't even need to go to that website. But before we get ahead of ourselves, how do we apply this to supply chain planning? And so we'll just do a quick overview on AI here. AI can be generative, so that's like the Chat GPT or that Google search there, Google AI search, where it's a natural language model. It provides answers to questions based on its learning from multiple source materials, and how people are interacting with those source materials, right? So it's generative. AI can be agentic, right? And that's the next growth area. I think it's definitely going to be big, where AI will become an agent for us. It already is, but making automations, making decisions for us. And it is already happening today. It's pervasive, and sometimes you don't realize it. And it's just going to be, more and more as time goes on. But don't panic. I think if we get down to the nuts and bolts right now today, I'm talking here about predictive analytics or AI forecasting. That's where you can make a very quick change to how you're doing your demand planning, how you're approaching your holiday season. And that's to bring together that what we talked about earlier, that whole bunch of different signals that we've talked about to provide an optimal, nimble, and realistic forecast that accurately predicts your future sales. So, just stick at that level, that predictive AI, that AI forecasting, it's really going to help you because you can look at more than just seasonality. You can look at more than just historical sales. You can say, if you're a computer manufacturer, what are the latest consumer sentiments, the latest bloggers saying about this product or that product? How is that going to affect, the ability to launch my next product, right? Um, you know, AI forecasting has been around for decades, or it's definitely machine learning, and it's a lot easier. You don't need an actuary now. You can use a whole lot of different systems. There's ensemble models. You can also have a framework around AI that can accommodate your business nuances. So I think if you can, blend AI forecasting with that dynamic cover idea, ABC, XYZ, yeah, that's going to allow you to make a seismic shift in your planning accuracy in real world outcomes. Jeremy, what do you think?
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think for me in a demand planning role, I would say, how do we implement it practically? AI is only going to be as good as the information you can put in, right? So, for example, if your supply chain team is not properly planning promotions and pricing discounts well enough in advance of your lead time, how do you expect AI to properly forecast for you and to get that inventory in time, right? So I would say for me in my role, AI means we kind of need to change the paradigm shift from us focusing on getting the output right to us focusing on getting the human inputs right, so that we guide the output.
Yeah, that is spot on. I think, when we initially talk AI, everyone's worried about the algorithms and, what extent can they add weather patterns and the latest 49ers results and whatever. But however, none of that matters, right? Unless you can get your data right. And that's really the most important thing.
Yep, it definitely is. And that's always the biggest challenge, for most companies when they're getting started looking at modernizing their demand planning overall, certainly before they take that leap into the AI tools as well. So, how Algo helps businesses get there, right, on this journey? Maybe this is a good transition point to address how we help our customers and their demand planning teams to get going and in terms of best practices with their data prep and process. So, Sanjeev, what are you sort of seeing on a regular basis, and what do you recommend?
Yeah, thanks, Karen. I think before you can start to really accelerate your demand planning, you need to have your data in check. I think we mentioned that about 10 times here during this piece. But I remember hearing, I think it was Walmart went on a 6-year journey to bring their data into a state that would bring returns from AI. So, obviously that's a large scale company, but 6 years to get your data right. So don't underestimate the need for a project to bring that data together. At Algo, when we work with our customers, we look at, clarifying your strategy. First of all, are you a high-low retailer in terms of everything's promoted all the time, on, off, on, off? Are you everyday low price? Are you just trying to keep the lowest price possible? Do you have a long tail of SKUs Or is your business very tight with just the KVIs, key value items, right? You're running. What are the lead times? What is the realistic ability to react, right? Then step two is what are your available internal and external data points, sales, market indexes, all that stuff. And all that stuff's great, but if they're not clean, if they're not timely, if they're not structured well, they're going to be difficult to use. Now, Algo can help with some of those things. We can definitely help cleanse the data. We can help organize pipelines and things to make sure that things become timely and are obviously structured. But some things you might want to use just may not be in an ability to be used. And I think that's something which comes to the next step, which is evaluate these different areas and work out what will move the accuracy needle, in your specific instance. And that is where you're doing feature checking, what's called feature checking in machine learning AI model training, right? You've got a whole bunch of inputs, you put them in the blender, but which ones actually made the difference to the taste at the end of the recipe, right? And we've had that with many customers where they tell us, oh, this is our most important thing. This particular factor, this index really affects how our sales go. But when you dig in and look at it, that index is a bit of a red herring signal. It actually isn't the mover. We find other things that are the mover. So, analyze those, and we assist with that, obviously, as we bring things together. And then step four is, bringing those models, once they're accurate, the forecasts are accurate, into a collaborative workspace. And that's got to be configured correctly. As I mentioned before, I think with my analogy, correctly for the language that your business, your teams speak, right? Bringing them together with those numbers. Jeremy, how do you approach that?
Yeah, in terms of getting there, I would say, to recap, some of the most common breakdowns we see are one, getting the data and the inputs right, two, collaboration and alignment with the retailers, and three, the gap between demand planning and actual replenishment. So I think we might be a little bit short on time now, but I mentioned all the upfront work we do to fix the data gaps. That's the paradigm shift I was talking about the human input guiding the system. So we help our customers create a solid demand plan, and if they're VMI or CMI, we have the ability to cut and recommend POs ourselves, and then handle store level replenishment ourselves. If they're not vendor managed and they rely on the retailers to manage their own order book, then it's really critical to hold them accountable and make sure the retail ladder plan aligns with us and our customers' plans. So from there, even if orders and inventory do align with that plan from a top line or item line level, is product making it to stores correctly to meet that demand? So like I mentioned earlier, that's a super common gap I see where all this work has been done on the front end, product makes it to DCs, and it's not properly replenished. So in terms of guiding and measuring, that's where we use our interactive platform reporting to measure all these key KPIs and have those conversations back with the retailer. So things like measuring in stock by various volume groups rather than just overall in stock, because that helps us track how effective the replenishment and the execution is on the retailer side.
Right. Okay. And so I think, guys, we're getting towards the end of our time together, but Sanjeev, I always like to sort of tie things up with the quick wins, quick ways to get started. What are those top four really important bullets to consider, Sanjeev, when you're at this
Yeah,
stage?
absolutely. So one, start small, start with almost like a pilot, start with 1 to 2 critical product lines or business units, right? Identify 2 to 3 data sources that drive, 80% of your forecast value. There's the first 2 steps you can do straight away, right? Then you need to get a baseline of current performance, forecast error, cycle time, manual effort. That's probably step 3. And then step 4, as I said, run a pilot using some kind of forecasting process. At Algo, we've got a managed forecast process, demand forecasting as a service. So we can help build that for you. And we've done that in a period of somewhere along 6 to 8 weeks, not 6 to 8 months. And that's really what mid-market companies are looking for: fast time to insight. Not a giant software implementation.
Yeah, I think you nailed it. I would say my quick wins, and getting customers started is just let the tool do the work. Let it normalize the data, provide a clean baseline forecast, so that we're doing the heavy lifting. Then leverage the forecasting engine to forecast product groups down to the lowest grain, and allow the forecaster to generate those promotional uplifts. That way you are then focusing your time on key business decisions.
Right. Yep. And I think, finally to sum it up, you don't need perfect data. You need structured, trusted, and usable data. That's really important. AI is not a magical fix. It's a multiplier, right? It multiplies what your foundation sits on, and it needs to be a paradigm shift in your thinking. It's more about now managing the inputs, not the outputs. I think Jeremy said that really well. And the best path forward, start small, move fast, and make your forecast trusted again. Karen?
Yeah, for sure. So we didn't have, and this was my bad for at the top of the session to not say, hey, everybody chime in with Q&As. And but we do typically get sort of similar themed questions, whether it's in our webinars or when you're working with customers or new prospects when we're talking about our solutions. So I don't know, Sandra or Jeremy, if you want to touch on one or two, like one of them, how far out do we typically start our holiday planning? Um,
Sure.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that really varies based on the product type and the lead time, but I would say typically 6 months out. Even if you don't know your exact promotions yet, or any sort of promotional plan, you need a base plan for procuring goods and raw materials. So, as we mentioned earlier, and you've heard us say many times, get your data aligned and identify any gaps or abnormalities in your comp data so you can get started early. So you can do that even more than 6 months out. I do that typically at the end of any holiday season, is go back and review what actually occurred, and take notes of that. So when the system is detecting and making recommendations next year, you have kind of those human notes and those human just mental memories to align with that. So I would start 6 months out, get your data right, and then start increasing the frequency of adjusting and touching base with the greater supply chain team as you approach your drop dead date for manufacturing. So step one, data. Step two, aligning internally. And at the end, please make sure you align with retailers on execution.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Do we want to talk about the hot button of tariffs and inflation? I know it's really crazy these days. Tariffs one day, not the next. We do use our scenario modeling for those situations. That may be too much to get into now with these few minutes left, Jeremy, but any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, probably not time for specifics, but just in general, yeah, that's a great question because it's tricky, and you really don't know where it's going to go. So, bit of a moving target, but like you mentioned, we just have to rely on our scenario modeling. So, doing some price elasticity analysis, probably by line of business, is key to understand like what price points are going to affect demand, and figuring out like what SKUs are price sensitive versus price resilient. And then build a scenario for each of those price point targets. We can build as many consensus forecasts. So, we may have a consensus, but we also might want to set a kind of a high-low scenario, kind of like a confidence interval, right? And then once we actually know how things are going to actualize, we can easily adjust to one of those scenarios. So I think it's key just have a plan with the retailer in advance of what to do with any additional inventory as well, because I think a lot of this we've talked about having a plan to adjust and get more inventory, but what if you have price changes and tariffs that affect you to where you end up having too much inventory, right? You really need to have some sort of a markdown or a return contingency plan in tandem with your demand plan.
Yeah, fair enough. All right. Well, I think we've come to the end of our time together today, guys, and thank you so much for your insight. We love to do these supply chain chat series with our fellow Algo people as well as others over time, so we always appreciate attendees joining